Thanks for coming along this morning. We're having a quick workshop on pruning grapevines and demonstrating principally the two main methods of pruning. That's spur pruning and cane pruning. A lot of people get intimidated by pruning, whether it's pruning grapevines, roses, citrus, fruit trees or whatever. In reality, it's quite simple. Mostly there are specific techniques for different plants, but in essence, I look at a tree or a vine and in the first instance I'll think about, I'll prune off any dead wood or any severely diseased or pest-ridden wood. I'll get rid of that in the first place, and once I've got rid of that, then I'll start shaping the shrub or tree or vine to suit whether it's just in terms of its growth habit, managing its growth habit, or managing production of food. Generally, there's three things we use. I've only got two of them here. I use a pair of secretaries. I've got the Velcro pair of secretaries. Also use the parrot beaks. That's for larger wood. When you want to prune larger wood, a lot of people will use their secretaries, and I mean these are about $120, $130, this pair of secretaries, and if I use that on a large piece of wood, I'm just as likely to snap the braid and be $30 or $40 or $50 out of pocket. So that's when you use the parrot beaks. You know, you need to make sure that you keep your parrot beaks or your secretaries clean and sharp, so they have to be well serviced. So you'll see over here I've got a different material. I've got some detergent there, I've got a little scrubber to scourer just to clean up the secretaries, a cloth to wipe it down, and I've got some grease and lubricating material to I guess keep these in good nick. One thing I generally have particularly when I'm pruning roses, for example, or I'm pruning from one vine to another, I generally have some bleach, and I just make up bleach at 10% strength, bleach and water into a container, and when I go from one vine to another or one rose bush to another, I dunk it into the bleach. That just helps sterilize it and keep it so that I'm not transferring disease from one plant to another, one vine to another. Okay, so it really is important. People do tend to not pay a lot of attention to maintaining their implements, but it really is important that these are clean and that they're sharp, because if they're blunt or loose, when you actually prune, you won't get a nice clean cut, and that way if you tear the wood, bruise the wood, you'll end up increasing the risk of introducing disease into your plant. So that's really important. When we're pruning, there's a general rule: we always keep the blade closest to the piece of wood that we want to keep. So if this is the part of the wood we want to keep and we're removing this piece of wood, right, we would prune with the blade closest to here. You can see here, this part of the secretaire is resting against this piece of wood. Right? Now when you press down and put pressure on that, it bruises this piece of wood. But it doesn't matter, because that's the part we don't want. If we prune the other way round, like this, and this is the bit of wood we wanted to keep, we're now putting pressure on that bit of wood and bruising it. So we always prune with the blade closest to the piece of wood that we want. Alright, so that's quite important. When we're pruning, equally, we've got a node here, or a bud here and there, right? Now, a lot of people, just will prune like that. You know, they're just very quick at it and they'll prune. We've got a piece of wood now that's 3 centimeters long, 2.5 to 3 centimeters long, will never do anything, right? Nothing will grow out of there. The growth will come from where the bud is, which is here. This piece of wood will gradually die in time. Now the problem with it being is that what can happen is this can start to die back, and this is very noticeable on roses. It'll start to die back generally on the side opposite where the bud is, and it'll gradually die back further and further and further, and it'll get to where the bud is. If it continues to die back, then you'll get actual dieback occurring, and that branch will start to die off. What we normally do is we prune on an angle, and we prune just above that bud. The lowest part of the cut, right, should be about 3 millimetres above the bud, right? So you can see there, that is probably a little bit close, but that's a couple of millimetres above the top of the bud, right? So that's not a bad cut, right? You won't get dieback occurring there. What'll happen is that wound will seal and decrease the risk of infection, yeah, and the new growth will spurt from that bud.
What's the reason for the angle?
The angle, basically, it's well, it means that things are less likely to sit on there, right? So you can get rain. A raindrop sits on a cut piece of wood, it'll sit there, and increasing the risk of you know, affecting the wood, right? Rot occurring, or disease, you know, the moisture and disease sitting there. So things, when it's on it's basically what you're doing is you're creating a sloper roof, and things will slide off as they would on your house. All right. The other thing also is, like when I'm pruning, particularly when I'm taking cuttings, for example, I always, like, you take a cutting of a grapevine, and you might find that the wood's as thick at the bottom as it is at the top. It isn't on this piece of wood, but what I always do is I always cut the top on an angle, so that's the roof, and the bottom I cut square or flat, and that's the floor, right? So if I was taking cuttings, that's how, so I can, you know, drop it on the ground, pick it up, and I'll always know which is the top and which is the bottom. With your grapevines, we spur prune, and you can see from this little chart here that certain vines are spur pruned and some are cane pruned. All right. For example, your sultanas, you cane prune, your carina, cane prune. A lot of those ones are cane prune. Your autumn royal, you spur prune, for example. Your Italia, you spur prune. Right. So there are different methods. Now the problem is that most people spur prune. Spur pruning is essentially pruning back to 2 buds. Right? But what you do is, if, for example, you're spur pruning a Menindee seedless, and you're pruning it back to 2 buds, you're pruning off most of the crop, right? And you know, your vine grows prolifically. You get 1 or 2 bunches maybe, and nothing else, and you go, well, this vine's useless because it's not giving me grapes. Well, no, it's not the vine that's useless, it's the pruner that's useless because they're pruning incorrectly. All right, so that's a critical thing. So certain vines need to be spur pruned, that is pruning back to two buds. These other vines that need to be cane pruned, we prune back to 8 to 12 buds, because it's on that bit of wood that you get the next season's grapes. Equally though, when we cane prune, we also spur prune as well some of the laterals, right? And we prune them back to 2 buds. The reason for that being is that they will produce the canes for next season, right? The following season, not the current season, the following season, right? Because if we kept cane pruning back to 8 to 12 buds, so we're talking about a cane this long, well, next season if we did 8 to 12 again, we'd be out here, and the following season we'd be out here. So all of a sudden the cane's going to be this long. We mightn't want it that long, and it'll continue to get longer every year. So that's why we cane prune and we spur prune. Right, time to demonstrate.